Dana White would rather walk barefoot on hot coals than see Tito Ortiz lift a championship belt. This feud was so serious that Dana was willing to physically beat up his own fighter. But that's not all. Dana would also do everything in his power to stop Denise Hallman from becoming a champion after Denise showed up to a fight one sheer speedo away from full nakedness. Yep, you heard that right, but believe it or not, this is just the beginning of the list of people Dana White doesn't want as champions. Paul Daly. Paul Daly is at the top of the list of fighters who blew their shot at becoming a champion, and Dana White would probably agree. Back in 2009, the British fighter joined the UFC. Now, Daly wasn't just some random fighter. He had already fought for big organizations like Pancrase and Strikeforce. People knew him for his knockout power. His UFC debut was strong, and he looked like he might be on a path to the top, but things changed fast. In a fight against Josh Koscheck, Daly lost by a decision. That alone wasn't the issue. The problem was what happened after. Daly took a cheap shot at Koscheck after the fight was over, and White didn't waste a second.
He's done. I don't give a shit if he's the best 170-pounder in the world. He'll never come back here again.
Daly was out, banned for life, just like that. I bet he wishes he had kept his hands to himself, but, well, one bad decision can end it all. Just ask Daly. Speaking of careers cut short, let's talk about Nate Marquardt. Nate Marquardt. When Dana White found out Nate Marquardt couldn't get medical clearance for his main event fight against Rick Story at UFC on Versus 4, he didn't just pull the plug on the fight, he pulled the plug on Marquardt's whole career.
Nate's done. I'm done with Nate.
Dana,
Listen, Nate's a really nice guy. He's a real sweet, nice, humble guy. But the facts are the facts, and it is what it is.
Dana's fighters probably get a little nervous anytime he steps up for an interview after they mess up, but not Nate. Dana challenged Nate to step up and explain to fans why he was cut, and he did exactly that. In an interview on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani, Marquardt admitted he'd been on testosterone replacement therapy. After his results, he was suspended by the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission and cut from the UFC. Marquardt was genuinely sorry and seemed pretty broken up about it, but whether or not he's ever getting back in that cage is, well, anyone's guess. Marquardt learned the hard way that apologies don't always buy you a second chance in Dana's world, but if you think that's tough, wait until you hear how Lyoto Machida found himself in White's crosshairs. Lyoto Machida. Dana White wanted Machida to fight Rashad Evans. At first, Machida was all for it, but then his team decided they wanted extra pay and came back to demand it from Dana. But they didn't want just any raise. They wanted Anderson Silva level money. To be honest, Lyoto deserved it. The UFC might overhype many fighters, but Lyoto Machida has earned his fame. Before joining the UFC, Machida beat big names like Rich Franklin, Stephan Bonnar, and BJ Penn. Sure, Penn was fighting way above his natural weight, but still, it's impressive. When Machida finally reached the UFC, he went on a tear. He won his first 3 fights, took down Sokuju, who was supposed to be the next big thing, dominated Tito Ortiz, knocked out Thiago Silva, and then won the belt with a brutal KO against Rashad Evans. That track record deserves some extra pay if you ask me, but Dana was not happy, and as you know by now, he's not exactly the patient type either. So what did he do? He passed up Machida's opportunity to Tito Ortiz. Tito didn't ask for a single penny more and readily agreed to take the fight. So just like that, Tito got the shot and Machida missed out. But what's funny is that even Tito Ortiz himself somehow found himself on White's list, because with Dana, nobody is ever safe. What did Tito do? Let's get right into it. Tito Ortiz. Dana White has had his fair share of beef, but none has gotten under his skin as the one he has with Tito Ortiz and Randy Couture.
There are probably 2 guys that absolutely tried to destroy the company at that time, and it was Tito Ortiz and Randy Couture.
really?
100%, yeah. Two of the worst guys to ever deal with.
Tito was a pain for Dana, always pushing for more money and calling out the UFC's pay. Tito Ortiz said many UFC fighters are treated like slaves by Dana White and don't get enough money, even though Ortiz has made a lot himself. Couture even ditched the UFC in 2007 and left his heavyweight title behind in a contract fight.
And Tito's just a really dumb human being. He's not intelligent at all. He's very, very stupid. Okay, let's start there. And I mean, look at him speak publicly anytime. Look, Google Tito Ortiz talking, okay? You know, and I don't have any beef with Tito anymore. And Tito,
I can
you
tell.
know you're stupid, Tito. You know you are.
What's funny about this beef is that it almost turned physical. Dana and Tito planned a boxing match until it flopped, and they blamed each other. Safe to say, neither one is getting a Christmas card nor championship opportunities from Dana White anytime soon. Still on the topic of bad blood, let's move on to Fedor Emelianenko, a man Dana White never even wanted to deal with. Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor Emelianenko and Dana White never got around to doing business together, and honestly, Dana's just fine with that. So Fedor's last fight went down at Bellator 290. He took on Ryan Bader, and let's just say the first round, knockout, ouch. But the cool part was that after the fight, Fedor got a huge send-off in the cage. UFC legends like Randy Couture, Matt Hughes, Quinton Jackson, Frank Shamrock, and Mark Coleman were all there to honor him. Dana was later asked what he thought about Fedor's final fight, and you can probably guess Dana's response.
Listen, there's a guy like 46. Yeah, he shouldn't be fighting. But you know, he's a grown man and can do whatever he wants to do. But yeah, he probably should have hung it up a few years ago.
Dana went on to say,
I never was one of the guys that thought he was one of the greatest of all time.
Well, that pretty much sums it up. Happy retirement, Fedor Emelianenko. You had a great run, even though Dana White doesn't think so. Now let's move on to Bob Arum, a guy who never stepped into the ring but somehow still managed to pick a fight with Dana, and knowing Dana, things got quite messy. Bob Arum. Next up, we have Bob Arum, a boxing promoter who's probably the farthest away from being a boxing champion because, well, he chose to sit behind a mic instead. Still, Dana White has some pretty strong thoughts about Bob, not because of his profession, but because of his comments about the UFC.
UFC are a bunch of skinhead white guys watching people in the ring who are also look like skinhead white guys.
But Bob didn't stop there. He also criticized the UFC for underpaying their fighters and their urgency to return to holding events during the COVID-19 pandemic. It shouldn't be a surprise at this point what Dana's reaction would be.
Imagine trying to work with Bob Arum. You know what I mean? Look at all the that this guy has said, even through COVID. The guy basically had him and Don King that ran the sport for all those years, and what the did he do? And where's he at now? What's his company worth?
Ouch, that's pretty low. Dana is reminding Bob who's the boss here, and it isn't looking good for Bob. This is exactly why you should probably think twice, maybe thrice, before criticizing Dana or the UFC. But, just like Bob, the next person on our list wasn't that smart, and he didn't get away with it. Josh Barnett. When Dana White publicly claims he highly doubts if you'll be cleared by any athletic commission to fight in a heavyweight tournament, you know you're in real trouble. Then, when he goes on to add that he's not your fan and he thinks you're bad for the sport, maybe find a new career. Unfortunately, this was Josh Barnett's fate. Dana White made it clear he had no respect for Josh Barnett, especially after Barnett tested positive for steroids 3 times and never owned up to it. White also disliked Barnett's self-centered attitude and vowed Barnett would never return to the UFC. Barnett, who signed a new deal at Strikeforce after UFC stripped him of his youngest ever UFC heavyweight champion title, threw some shade at Dana, calling him unprofessional and a hindrance in the sports community. When the interviewer asked him what he felt about Dana's claims that he was going to fail his drug tests again and never going to return to the UFC, Josh answered,
"Oh no, I'll definitely pass the test. You know, Dana White's stature has changed quite a bit over the years from a boxer-size instructor. I don't think it's all been all the Doritos eating, beer drinking, and pretending to be a fighter that's put so much weight on him either. I'd be interested to see Dana White pass some drug tests."
Going further to talk about Dana's receding hairline and big shoulders, Josh added,
"You know, if he wants, I can come pee in his mouth and he can tell me if he can taste any Dianabol on it or anything like that. Oh, he might swing that way. You never know. He's so manly and hetero. Maybe he wants to get real Spartan about things."
Yup, he really said that. But luckily for Josh, he had another shot at rejoining the UFC and took it in 2013. He, however, left again in 2018. Talking about Dana's forgiveness, it's very rare to see, but luckily for the next person on our list, he also got another shot. Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson's knockout made him a free agent, but his mouth may have made him a permanent UFC outsider. After Dan Henderson knocked out Michael Bisping at UFC 100, he became a big name in the fight world. Everyone thought he'd re-sign with the UFC because, well, that's what fighters did back then. Where else was bigger? But no, Dan decided to go his own way and signed with Strikeforce instead. And let me tell you, Dana White was not thrilled about it. He came out and declared it was over between them.
Wouldn't he be an asset to have?
To them, maybe. He's not to me.
Why is that?
Just because it's over with me and Dan Henderson.
That's a serious statement in the fight business because when Dana says it's over, he means it. So what did Dan do? He clapped back and called Dana a fat ass. Yep, just like that. Now, you can bet Dana wouldn't let Dan near a UFC championship afterward. He would probably put up walls to ensure Dan couldn't even smell a title shot, but he didn't. Luckily, or unluckily, for Dan, the UFC bought the Strikeforce, leaving his career in the hands of the fat ass. He did try his best though. He worked so hard for his career that at retirement he held around 4 different titles and was the oldest fighter on the UFC roster. So yeah, hard work and luck does have a role to play in Dan's story. I bet nobody would have told him to do the right thing when it came to Dana from then on. At least he walked away with titles and a legacy. The next person on our list, Gary and Jared Shaw, on the other hand, took their fight with Dana outside the octagon, and let's just say it didn't end with a belt around their waist. Gary and Jared Shaw. Boxing promoter Gary Shaw seriously ticked Dana White off when he claimed his promotion, Elite XC, was catching up to the UFC in the MMA world. Now, if there's one thing Dana can't stand, it's someone acting like they're on his level, especially in his sport. So, you can imagine Dana's reaction when Gary criticized his decision to cut Kimbo Slice from the UFC.
I think the UFC made a huge mistake. Once again, Dana's ego has probably gotten in the way. I think Kimbo Slice could be a draw wherever he goes around the world. I think they matched him up wrong.
From then on, Shaw was on Dana's radar as one of his most hated rivals, and knowing Dana, he probably made a point of making life in MMA as tough as possible for Shaw to show who's running the show. But if you think Shaw's story is wild, wait until you hear about Tom Atencio. Tom Atencio poked a sleeping bear and got exactly what you'd expect. So here's how it all went down. We all know that Dana White is used to stirring things up, but he probably didn't see this one coming. Atencio, who runs Affliction Entertainment, challenged Dana to a fight.
Sometimes acts like a fighter, so why doesn't he fight? You know, I think that the whole thing with Tito Ortiz when he was supposed to fight Tito, I really don't think that was ever going to happen.
Now, if you know Dana, you know he's not exactly the type to back down from a challenge. He was on a corporate retreat in Miami when he found out Atencio wanted to throw hands. And what was Dana's reaction? Laughter. Pure, amused disbelief. I mean, Atencio is trying to pull off his major pay-per-view with Fedor Emelianenko, and he's still making time to pick a fight with Dana. Bold move, to say the least. Dana, an ex-amateur boxer himself, didn't even have to respond to this one seriously.
Tom Atencio is a loser, number one. Okay? He's not a good promoter, and he's definitely not a good fighter.
Safe to say that Tom will wait a very long time to get that fight, and any championships in MMA, but it looks like Kimbo Slice may wait a little longer. Kimbo Slice. Kimbo was that street fighter who became famous for backyard brawls and parking lot throwdowns. He had everything it took to be a champion, and everybody, except Dana White of course, saw it too. Elite XC first contacted Kimbo and gave him his first fight with Bo Cantrell. Kimbo knocked him out in 19 seconds. Yes, 19 seconds. Blink, and you'd have missed it. Then they put him up against Tank Abbott, a veteran known for his heavy punches. Kimbo took him out too in the first round. His next fight was with James Thompson, and this one was messy. Kimbo looked tired, and Thompson was winning, until Kimbo burst his cauliflower ear and the fight was stopped. Then came the big showdown with Ken Shamrock, but at the last minute, Shamrock got injured. So they swapped in Seth Petruzzelli, and unfortunately, Kimbo was TKO'd in 13 seconds. Just like that, the unstoppable Kimbo Slice lost his shine. Fans called him overrated, and Dana White was only too happy to jump on that train.
Kimbo Slice sucks. Like I've said now for the last few months, this guy can't fight, and he got knocked out in 13 seconds by a guy who didn't win the Ultimate Fighter and who didn't win fights in the UFC.
Dana couldn't stand how much hype Kimbo had, and he soon ended up being someone Dana never wanted at the top of his game. Kimbo passed away in 2016. While Dana couldn't stand the hype surrounding Kimbo, James Toney, on the other hand, had such boldness that quickly became his downfall. James Toney. You just know you're setting yourself up for failure in the MMA world when you sit in front of a camera and brag so carelessly that wrestling is a piece of cake compared to boxing. It was too late when James Toney realized this. Now, I don't think Toney realized just how seriously Dana White would take that. Toney stalked Dana for months, practically begging for a fight, and Dana, seeing an opportunity to teach the boxing community a lesson, finally gave in on his terms. There were rumors about Toney facing off with guys like Randy Couture, who, to put it plainly, would probably treat Toney like a training dummy, and that's exactly the point Dana wanted to make. That's exactly what happened. Couture wasted no time and tossed Toney to the mat like he was taking out the trash. Then, with a smooth arm triangle choke, he wrapped things up at 3:19 in the first round. I'd be embarrassed if I were Toney, and I'd forget being a wrestling champion. But one thing about MMA is that if you think you've had it worse, there's always someone out there who has had it tougher. Rampage Jackson is one of those people. Rampage Jackson. At one point, Rampage Jackson was one of the UFC's most loved fighters, even landing big deals like a Reebok sponsorship. But in 2013, he says the UFC cost him a ton of money by swiping that sponsorship right out from under him. As if that wasn't enough, Jackson went against Dana to star in a movie.
I my relationship with the UFC by doing that movie over that Rashad fight. What was the movie?
18.
Oh, that's right.
That's when our relationship with Dana and everybody.
But Jackson wasn't even done. He went on a hit-and-run spree, side-swapping 2 cars and nearly running over a bunch of people waiting at a bus stop. He kept going, even with a shredded front tire, until he finally gave up to the cops. The fighter was charged with felony evading, reckless driving, and hit-and-run. Basically, a whole lot of trouble. And though he didn't get blamed for a tragic miscarriage linked to the incident, Dana is not exactly handing him any championship belts after that little episode. You won't believe who's next on Dana's list. Stick around to find out. Frank Shamrock. Frank Shamrock also has some history with Dana White and the UFC, and let's just say it's not exactly friendly. Frank was one of the UFC's first stars. He won the light heavyweight title in 1997 and even beat Tito Ortiz in 1999 before deciding to retire and leave the UFC. But after returning to fighting a year later with K1 and WEC, things went sour. Now, Frank hinted that Dana has a grudge against him and even kept him out of the Hall of Fame on purpose. When Frank was asked if he saw himself fixing his relationship with Dana in the future, this was his response.
Nah. He's a piece of crap. I have no interest. I mean, he's not in my life. That's the other reason I'm not in the sport. He's the figurehead of the sport. I don't want anything to do with him and by proxy, this sport.
For more context, Frank used to be Dana's trainer before he went on to buy the UFC. After the purchase, he clashed with Dana over the UFC's marketing approach and ultimately decided to leave, which didn't sit well with Dana. Here's Dana's response to Frank.
Frank Shamrock is an irrelevant jack, okay? He's a two-faced lion. I mean, Frank Shamrock, I bet he didn't say on your radio show that he flew out to my office a month ago, sat down with me and tried to make peace with me.
Well, that pretty much sums it up, but this is not where it ends. Believe it or not, Pat Miletich won't also be getting any championship belts from Dana in this lifetime. Let's talk about why. Pat Miletich. Pat Miletich was the UFC's first welterweight champion and trained some of the greatest fighters in its history. He fought back when virtually nobody was watching MMA. During the early days of the Zuffa era, when Dana White and the Fertitta brothers worked to revive the UFC, Miletich built the sport's first super camp of champions. Yet, Miletich was noticeably absent from UFC broadcasts and events for some time. There have been rumors of a serious falling out between Miletich and the UFC. Some say it began when he left to work with the International Fight League, which tried to compete with the UFC. Later, Miletich worked with Showtime and commented on Strikeforce events, another UFC rival at the time. Whatever the reason, Miletich's split with the UFC remained a point of speculation for fans. Well, until he made a false claim about the UFC, Dana had no choice but to speak up.
I don't know if Pat really said that, but if he did, he has to be the dumbest planet. I mean, you know how stupid you have to be to even think something like that, let alone say it publicly and act like you're serious.
That was Dana responding to claims that the UFC might have intentionally advised Khamzat Chimaev to lose weight for promotional reasons and dismissing the idea as false since tickets were already sold out by weigh-in day. During his response, a reporter clarified that it was Brendan Schaub, not Pat Miletich, who originally made the claim. White then redirected his response toward Schaub, correcting his mistake. Now, let's talk about Dricus du Plessis, whom Dana set up in a fight. Dricus du Plessis. At 30, Dricus du Plessis became the UFC middleweight champion in January, securing a split decision victory over Sean Strickland at UFC 297. The first South African to earn a UFC title, du Plessis boasted a flawless 7-0 record in the octagon, with major wins over Robert Whittaker, Darren Till, and Derek Brunson. Despite his success, Dana White hasn't shown much enthusiasm for du Plessis as the reigning champion. Dana made this glaring with his comments that Strickland actually won his fight against du Plessis, and Plessis wasn't too happy about this.
Just so for the record, is there some people that think I lost the fight?
Dana actually said he's good for sure.
Dana said it? Well,
Meanwhile, Israel Adesanya, the two-time former middleweight champion, was originally set to face du Plessis in late 2023, but with du Plessis unavailable for that date, Adesanya fought Strickland instead, suffering a shocking loss. Adesanya's earlier 12-fight win streak at 185 pounds, second only to Anderson Silva's in UFC history, highlighted his dominance, a status White likely preferred over du Plessis' recent rise. The next person on our list ended his career even before Dana had the opportunity to do so. What did he do? Let's find out. Caleb Starnes. Personally, I wouldn't blame Dana White for this one. Caleb Starnes has become a running joke in MMA after his disappointing fight at UFC 83, where he spent the entire 15 minutes avoiding Nate Quarry. Following the fight, White cut ties with Starnes, though it's unclear whether Starnes was fired or chose to leave. According to Starnes, he chose to leave.
You know, the story's inaccurate. I asked to be released from my contract. It's not like they stepped up and released me. Nobody contacted me and said I was going to be released. I contacted them.
Rumors suggest that Starnes may be looking to join another promotion, but after his poor showing and the backlash from fans, it's tough to see why any organization would want him. Starnes' reputation took a big hit, and he'll need to do a lot to win back respect in the MMA community. Maybe winning back everyone else's respect is still possible, but something tells me Dana White isn't forgetting this anytime soon, because once you get yourself on his bad side, good luck getting out of it. Still on the topic of troublemakers who aren't getting any championships in this lifetime, we have Junie Browning. This one will truly shock you. Junie Browning. Controversial UFC fighter. Junie Browning was arrested Tuesday night after allegedly assaulting 3 nurses at St. Rose Dominican Hospital in Henderson, Nevada. Browning had been brought to the hospital after reportedly taking 16 Klonopin pills in a self-harm attempt. According to police, he faces 3 counts of battery on healthcare providers for allegedly pushing a female nurse, punching a male nurse, and kicking another male nurse. Following the incident, UFC President Dana White cut Browning from the UFC immediately. This marks another low point in Browning's turbulent career, further damaging his sports reputation. Browning did apologize a while later.
I just wanted to apologize to everybody that was involved in the situation that has happened recently. I don't have any excuses.
Luckily for Junie, Dana was in a good mood then, and Junie was one of the lucky few who managed to find their way back in. Caro Parisian, however, can't say the same. Caro Parisian. Dana White took to his Twitter to announce that Caro Parisian was officially out of his UFC 106 fight against Dustin Hazelett. While the specific reasons remain unclear, White's tone suggests he's fed up with Caro, likely due to previous issues.
Caro Parisian has a lot of problems, mentally, physically, emotionally, and he's got more problems than I could even talk about or care to talk about. He needs to get his personal life fixed and taken care of before he ever thinks about fighting again.
Parisian has a history of last-minute withdrawals, including pulling out of UFC 88 just before weigh-ins due to a back injury. His troubles didn't end there. After a split decision win over Dong Hyun Kim at UFC 94, Parisian tested positive for banned painkillers. This pattern of setbacks has strained his relationship with the UFC, and White's latest move indicates he may be done with Parisian for good. Now let's move on to Dennis Hallman, the funniest of all of Dana's beefs, and the only one who probably made him question his decision to enter the MMA world in the first place. Dennis Hallman. This one has to be the funniest of all of Dana White's beefs. Dennis Hallman had a weird fashion choice at UFC 133. So here's what happened. Hallman, a longtime MMA fighter, stepped into the cage to face Brian Ebersol, but he wasn't wearing the usual shorts. Nope, Hallman walked in, sporting a tiny blue Speedo. Yep, a Speedo. He probably thought it was funny, but to Dana White, it wasn't.
I'd call it disgusting. That was disgusting. I don't know how his cornermen. First of all, I'm pissed off that somebody that works for me let him come out with those on. It will never happen again, I can guarantee you that.
When Hallman was asked why he did what he did, this was his response.
I won't say what the bet was about, but I lost a bet to those guys, and the bet was, that losing the bet meant that I got to wear some Speedos.
White was so annoyed that he gave Ebersol a $70,000 bonus just for getting Hallman and his Speedo out of there as fast as possible. Ebersol made quick work of him, landing a ground and pound that led to a TKO finish. Hallman lost the fight, but that outfit will be talked about for a long time, and Dana White will never forget. If you enjoyed this video, click on any of the cards on your screen for similar content.